Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Coffee in Good Company series. My name is Janneke Wagner, and on behalf of the BLab Europe team, I welcome you to this session. Thank you for tuning in. The Coffee in Good Company series is an opportunity to learn more about what stakeholder governance is and what we can do to ensure that the future role of business is to be beneficial and not detrimental to people and the planet. And this series is leading us actually to the launch of the Interdependence Coalition to make the case that this is the way European businesses could go. And the Interdependence Coalition is a coalition of business leaders, workers, academics, and policymakers who want to change company law at a European level to make it mandatory for all businesses in Europe to take into account the interests of all stakeholders. Taking into account the interests of all means that companies take ownership of their social and environmental impact in their governance. And so far in our Coffee in Good Company series, we have invited leaders from European companies such as Illy Café, Organic Basics, and Triodos Bank, who exemplify what it is like to incorporate practices to ensure the needs of all stakeholders and ensure that these needs are met when doing business. We've also had lawyer Jaap Winter from INSEAD as part of this series, offering his insight on new corporate structures. But today we are really excited to invite Charlotte Hullmann as a speaker. Charlotte represents a younger generation that will help build, but also will help or will experience the consequences of future governance structures needed to implement to ensure the European Green Deal. And it is the younger generation that will be affected most by the decisions we take today and the structures we build today. And it is our duty to give our best now. And therefore, we are super delighted to hear her perspectives today. Charlotte is 23 years old and recently completed a bachelor's in international development management. She is currently a Public Policy and MarCom trainee at BLab Europe since March. And previously, she was also actually employed to help out with marketing next to her studies. At the end of this month, unfortunately, Charlotte will leave us for now to continue her studies. She decided to do a master's in environment and society studies. And this program really focuses on the way society deals with the physical environment. The program examines what are best and worst case practices, what is the role played by markets and governance, as well as society itself. Charlotte is passionate about facilitating the sustainable development of the world. She's passionate about networking and bringing the right people together, being part of the change and making visions, ideas, solutions viable for the future. And she is looking for the most efficient way to contribute her skills and knowledge to help shape the world. So join me in welcoming Charlotte. I'm really excited to dive the coming 30 minutes into the topic of stakeholder governance with you. I know you've got a nice cup of coffee with you. And without further ado, I would love to hear your answer to the question, what do you think is the role and responsibility of businesses in protecting people and the planet?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to just take the stage this time and next to so many inspiring business leaders and academics, actually being the one interviewed, because I was the one doing the tech support in the back, and now I find myself being the one interviewed. It's an honor to be kind of representing the younger generation and sharing my perspective. And so, yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. So on the question, what do I think is the responsibility of the business in the future? I think that business has had such a big impact on the world, on society, especially over the last centuries. And we have seen the big impact capitalism can have as a system. We've seen that it's been leading to a lot of wealth that has been generated, but we also see that our system has led to environmental degradation as well as also social inequality. And so I do think that we actually have to find a solution to, enable the system to become better, to enable also the future generations to live a decent life. And so we cannot live with the system as it is. We actually have to look for solutions and improve the system. And I think that businesses can be sort of a case study in what is actually possible. Businesses by themselves cannot change the system. But as we can see also in a community like the B Corp movement, we see the impact that businesses can have if they're actually coming together as a community and envisioning a better future for the world. So I think this is really what I think is the responsibility for businesses, to dream big and look for solutions and come together and have the impact they can have to improve the system we're living in, very broadly said.
All right. So I hear you mentioning the idea of systems change. What is the role, or what is the meaning of stakeholder governance in realizing such a systems change, according to you?
So we have seen that the system we're living in has been governed through shareholder governance. That means that businesses have primarily been focusing on generating wealth and value for those who own the company itself. And when we're looking at stakeholder governance, that is really the paradigm shift for the next century, really considering what could a world look like if the focus is not on generating wealth only for the ones owning the company, but actually all of the stakeholders, so all the groups, interest groups, which are being impacted by the operations of the company itself. So that is really asking a completely different question to the company, not just focusing on one stakeholder, the shareholder, but actually looking at all the stakeholders and really trying to understand how can we, as a business, how can a business take into account all of these different interests and generate wealth and value for the society as a whole, and also for the environment, not degrading the environment we're living in.
Interesting. And could you perhaps share a moment when you realized how important this shift is? Was there a specific aha moment that led you to become an advocate for stakeholder governance?
Well, as you also mentioned, I did my bachelor in international development management, and that study is really focusing on understanding the different problems or challenges. Let's say challenges, as the Dutch say. There is no problem, but there's challenges. But the different challenges we're facing in the system in which we're operating, whether that's the economic system, social system, any system. So my study has been really focusing on understanding what are challenges to achieve a sustainable development of the world, and more diving into what the challenges are. I also have experienced a certain vibe within my study that the problem is the economy, and some academics in international development management don't really want to dive into the economy. They're kind of having a rather negative perspective on the economy and not really diving into how can we improve it. And for me, I've really seen the economy as something that has generated a lot of wealth, and I think it's very, very powerful also to transform the situation we're in, the challenges we're facing. I think it can really work as a solution. And so that's why also, especially by doing my internship in 2019 at BLab Europe, where I was working on the multinational corporations approach, really talking to business leaders also on a multinational level, I've been starting to question how can we actually, with the help of businesses, transform the situation we're in. So I think really my study is really reflecting on the different issues we're facing and having many people really having a negative mindset about the economy in itself has led me to really question what the impact of businesses could be.
Mhm, mhm. And yeah, I find it really interesting that you've really expanded your view by gaining practical experience through an internship, working with companies who are willing to incorporate stakeholder governance practices. What did you see during your internship are challenges for the companies themselves, despite their willingness?
I think that stakeholder governance is, well, it's interesting because we perceive stakeholder governance, or I perceive stakeholder governance as a rather new concept. That the old concept was shareholder governance. But if we're looking back into history, it actually seems like shareholder governance has been a concept within the mid 20th century that has become more and more powerful. Before that, it wasn't really the focus of businesses neither to generate only wealth for the shareholders.
Mhm,
But so I think that what is really difficult for companies is to actually, um, yeah, take this step forward and say we're not going to be doing business the way that others are doing business. We're looking into different concepts. We're just going to be brave and bold and just taking that opportunity and doing what is right for us, because there is also going to be a lot of criticism probably, and no one has it entirely figured out yet how to balance the interests of all the stakeholders. And so it's a challenge, and it has to do with being brave to take on this challenge and be a leader in this field. But being in the working for B Lab and seeing so many inspiring businesses, I think that we have so much potential within the community to actually lead the way and
mhm,
show how stakeholder governance can be implemented, and share best practices, share the, yeah, case studies with, for example, Patagonia, as we also had Patagonia joining one of the Coffee and Good Company series, and or Triodos, for example, as well, and really making a clear line of explaining how you could actually incorporate stakeholder governance.
mhm, mhm. And so you've had the fortune to work with companies who perhaps can already be called leaders in this field. You mentioned Patagonia, you mentioned Triodos. Earlier, you mentioned that you don't believe solely businesses can transform the system. What more do you think is needed?
Other than only having businesses transform the system, I think we have so many structures enabling businesses to operate in the way they are operating. For example, if we're looking at the European level right now, what we're looking at with the Interdependence Coalition, especially, are different, yeah, consultations. At the moment, it's a sustainable corporate governance consultation. And so there are different structures which can help companies to actually be an advocate for sustainability, but there can also be structures which can disenable companies to be an advocate for sustainability. And
Mhm,
the example of this consultation is looking at due diligence, but also at the duty of care. So due diligence is rather looking at the supply chain of companies and pushing for social and environmental standards to be further incorporated. And the duty of care aspect is looking at the stakeholder governance, rather enabling companies to take into account all of the stakeholders. And we see here that this could be super powerful for the future. This could actually support companies to be brave and to take the step forward and to live up to their potential in generating a positive impact. But if we're having, for example, other structures in place, such as, for example, subsidiaries on fossil fuels, we see that companies are not rather disenabled to go for what is actually the more sustainable option. So there
mhm,
are different forms of legislative structures which can support the sustainable development or the rather unsustainable development, easily said.
mhm,
So that's why I personally believe that the Interdependence Coalition will be very powerful to just unite different actors within society and bring around this push on a European level that we actually want public policy makers, we want politicians to be brave and take the step now, because we just really need it at the moment. We need to enforce or ensure a future that is viable, that is sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we see indeed on a European level that the European Commission has now proposed a Green Deal, which is an incredibly ambitious set of policy initiatives with the overarching aim of making Europe as a region climate neutral in 2050. Um, and so this is an ambitious set of initiatives to help shape our future. What do you think should the future look like?
What should the future look like? That is a very good question. Um, I personally hope, and I think that many many women and men of my generation are just hoping that we can enable a future also for our children, our grandchildren, a future that is actually offering a dignified life, being able to have the same living standards as we're having today. And this is also part of social justice, just taking into the account the future generations. So a future would look like just giving our best and looking back and saying that we have done our best, and being able to tell the future generations it's going to be okay. Simple as this, a bit easily said, but I think this is really what it's all about.
Yeah, yeah, and I think if we look at the next generation, so to say, I think we see a lot of grassroots and activist movements. Of course, hugely influenced also by individuals like Greta Thunberg, but also many more across Europe. We've seen Fridays for Future pop up, and I guess what unites these movements is a sense of urgency, but also a strong demand from the ones in power today. And we already briefly spoke about the power of policy, but I would like to know from you, what do you specifically want lawmakers to do right now?
So, also leading back to what we were just touching upon, being the ones for lawmakers, really being the ones enabling businesses to be bold. So that can be, for example, also the consultation, which we're talking about at this very moment with the Interdependence Coalition. But it's not only bringing forward the public policy initiatives, it's also really about doing a lot of research and really what is the word in English? In German we say sich in etwas hineinfuchsen. What is, Janneke? What is the word in English? It's like really understanding a concept, understanding a topic, and becoming very, very passionate about a topic, and that is leading you to understand it and share your knowledge also with others and find those solutions. And I think this is really something that we need at the moment also for lawmakers, understanding the structures, understanding what is possible. So if you're a lawmaker at this moment watching this video, please do feel free to reach out to us and become part of this initiative, because we just need more passionate, insightful lawmakers to find these solutions.
Yeah, wow, that's a strong statement. And I wonder, do we need different goals for our future? Do we need a different set of indicators that we measure success as a society by?
Well, it's always the challenge to define smart goals, right? No matter which project you're working on, defining the smart goals, it's a challenge. And I admire the goals which are already being set. But I think it's important to keep in mind that those are goals, and the goal of the goals is not actually to set the goals, but actually to reach them. And so not only focusing on the goals, but looking at what are our key KPIs to see whether we're reaching these goals. And so, for example, what I think is a very inspiring goal is the net zero by 2030, which the B Corp community is trying to achieve. And you see on a European level, we say net zero by, did we reduce it? I think it was 2050 first, and now I think we went to 2045, I think.
Yeah.
But please triple check me on this one. And I think those are great goals, but it's really about making these goals work and having the KPIs in place to understand how are we going to achieve these goals, and can we just be more ambitious than we are right now, because we need so much ambition to actually turn this around, so to say, and counteract the negative trends which we're seeing in place at the moment. So I guess my statement here would be the goals are great, but make sure that they're the most ambitious goals we can have, and that we're having the KPIs in place to actually check on ourselves whether we're on the right track to reaching them.
Yeah, to actually make sure that we are able to walk the talk.
Exactly. Yeah. Walking the talk.
And so I think if I speak for myself, but I bet also for those who have tuned in, I'd be really curious to hear from you what you think your stake in this future is and the role you can play.
The stake in my future. Well, looking at the situation I'm facing in Germany at this moment, so I'm coming from the west of Germany, from Gelsenkirchen. It's near Cologne. We've seen a massive flood catastrophe in our region. We see so much, wealth that has been destroyed at this very moment, and that's come from a lack of political action. We haven't invested the resources we should have invested to actually ensure that the people, like our people, the people living in our nation, are safe. There have been disaster risk management tools, but they haven't been, sufficient enough. And we had about, 200 people at least dying just because of this. And so I see my stake for the future to just really pushing forward to enable the flowing of the resources into the right areas, so we can actually mitigate the impact that is going to result from the actions we're having right now. So ensuring the best future we can have, and really pushing forward to find those solutions, to invest the resources into finding these solutions. It's just a matter of safety, for sure. And I think it has become, especially also in Germany, more and more apparent how much climate change is not only going to affect developing countries. And I say developing countries because which country is already developed it's a matter of own judgment, but we have realized how we're going to be affected by the consequences of the business, of the society we're living in. It's just a matter of security, the stake I have in the future, very easily said.
Right. Thanks, Charlotte. I wonder if there's anything before we close this session and briefly recap what we've learned from you, if there's anything you would like to add or feel like hasn't been mentioned yet.
Well, I guess also as a closing section, let's come together. Let's join this coalition. I'm so excited to see what we can, reach together, the goals we can set, the KPIs we can define, check on each other that we're reaching these goals, and also just pushing for the best solutions which we can imagine.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives in today's session. We are planning to host more sessions of the Coffee and Good Company series in the future. In the meantime, we are keeping an eye out to see how the first proposed policy initiatives as part of the Green Deal are being received by the European Parliament, whether these are going to be accepted or not. And we'll be sharing lots of news and resources on the Interdependence Coalition website. So do make sure to keep an eye out for that. And with that, I would like to close the session. Thank you so much for watching. And we would love to hear your perspectives. So do share those with us if you see fit. And hope to see you at the next edition.
Thank you so much for having me.